The overarching message that I can give is, pretty much leadership, local enforcement and all that here. They did a really good job of containing what could have been a much bigger problem.
Right.
Fresh in the minds of everyone is January 6th.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Intelligent Community, the podcast of the Intelligent Community Forum. I'm Lou Zaccarella, one of the founders of the Intelligent Community Forum, and we're glad that you came to our home today. Dan Circelli is the president of Connecting Windsor Essex, a nonprofit organization and consortium of over 40 member companies, associations, councils, and organizations in Windsor, Essex, Ontario, Canada. Home to many things, but home to the world's largest border crossing between Canada and the US among them. His experiences include IT manager, corporate training, director of educational and technical services, and product manager. Dan is known as an expert at creating collaborative teams to implement and advocate intelligent community initiatives for the Windsor Essex region. Of course, about 3 months ago, Dan had another experience along with his city in Windsor, Essex, which was, of course, the insurrection type trucker protest. And that's what we want to talk with him about today as we continue our series on leadership in unconventional times. Dan Circelli, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Lou. That's a heck of a nice introduction. I really appreciate that.
Well, it's great to see you again. It's all true, including, of course, the truckers. First of all, Dan, I just, as I mentioned, there are people around the world who may have seen what happened on that bridge, but don't know the who, what, when, and why. So why did truckers block the world's largest trade crossing earlier this year? Were they all Canadian? Were they American? Were they mixed? What actually went down there?
So from what we understand, there was definitely a mix because we definitely had support from American transport drivers as well as Canadian transport drivers. And, what triggered the activity was the mandate of vaccinations. So now if you were going to be a transport driver and you were crossing this international border, you were mandated to show proof of vaccinations. And as we've seen, that's as much a political issue as it was a health issue. And there were a lot of people who felt that was an unfair mandate to be imposed upon them. And so that was the cornerstone of what started up the whole convoy.
Yeah. Now, was there uneven regulation at the time with regard to COVID or restrictions, I should say, because most of that traffic is coming over from Michigan, Detroit, primarily. Now, was the United States at that time a little looser in their COVID restrictions? And so by the time they got to Canada, a new set of restrictions had gone into place?
So there was a couple different types of restrictions that applied. So we have a large amount of our nursing employable staff works in Michigan healthcare. And so they were immediately deemed essential workers, obviously in the healthcare industry and really needed. We also have a fair amount of people that are practicing doctors or interns that are Canadians. And again, they go into Michigan to further refine their craft. So they were deemed immediately as essential workers, and they were working, crossing the border daily, pre-vaccinations even being available. Now, there's a few of those people that I know personally, they got their vaccinations, even their booster shots, and they complied with everything that the hospitals were asking them to comply with, and they crossed without any issue. Right. Now, myself, as a not an essential worker needing to travel into the States, I couldn't travel into the States. So essentially the border was locked from, me being an interested tourist that might want to go there. I wouldn't be able to go. Now, again, if you go back into the early days of the pandemic and just how important that crossing intersection is, that border crossing there, no one was vaccinated, but transport traffic was considered essential and work was going on. This commerce was carrying on a day-to-day basis. So in one side, I have to say I could be empathetic to the drivers that were saying why this imposed rule. because if we go back in, over that 2-year period, they were certainly able to do the work. And then why the new imposed rule? And the word on the Canadian side was, this is an American request. So in order to enter that country, you need to be able to show proper vaccination.
Right. Now, had there been significant spread of COVID traced back to truckers? Because some of the other complaints were, truckers weren't really considered spreaders.
I don't think anyone I didn't hear that if anybody was tying it directly to, that traffic and international traffic. I don't think any of us could deny that, where does a new variant originate and spread from? It's going to be through an airport or where you have heavy traffic that's crossing a border. So I think to say, well, no, that was never reported, I think that would be naive. I think we would expect it to be coming across the border.
Right.
You got a considerably higher population base just on the other side. So we're going to get exposed to something different, and we're going to be crossing that back and forth. No different than our Pearson International Airport. And our Premier Doug Ford, famously said, I can't remember which variant he was talking about, but he said, look, it didn't swim here. So I think we all understood this.
That's right. Somebody would probably make a claim that it did, but we would throw that one out. But Dan, what we do know is that about $400 million a day go back and forth across that bridge.
That's right.
United States and Canada are the two largest trading partners on Earth. And that's a fact nobody can deny.
From what I understand, it's the highest amount of commerce at any border crossing into or out of the United States. So much higher than anything, even across the southern borders into Mexico. This is the highest amount of commerce on a day-to-day basis.
Right. And as we were talking about earlier, there's automotive industry activity and everything that flows with that also on both sides. So it's a critical place. Having said that, now the protests in Canada caught, I think, a lot of people where I am today in New York, in America, by surprise. Did the city of Windsor, Mayor Dilkins, yourself, and some of the other leadership have a clue it was coming? And could you have ever imagined the magnitude?
So there's varying amounts of clues. I believe, I don't think it caught us completely by surprise. I think the magnitude was surprising, but the event itself was sort of, there was indications that something was going to happen. I think I think some of the organizers published something on a website, Canada Unity site or something like that. So, in earlier, like sort of November, December 2021, they were frustrated, obviously, with the mandates or imposing mandates that were on their way. So I don't think there was a surprise. Magnitude, certainly, just all of a sudden our bridge was halted. There was no traffic crossing this thing for a couple of days. And then it started to open up and trickle and get better. So I think the magnitude was maybe a little surprising, but the event, I think we saw it coming.
Yeah. Now you're about a year out when this happens from the January 6th riots in Washington. Again, was there an initial reaction in Windsor that said, oh boy, we've got something similar here and we're going to react accordingly? And then the call goes to law enforcement and others about what they've got on their hands. What was that first reaction?
I would have to say, and proudly, I would like to say, leadership got aligned. So, was it the trigger or the memory of January 6th? I'm not going to say that had nothing to do with it, but it certainly played. It must have definitely played in the minds. I mean, Windsor is a border city. We border Detroit, Michigan. We witness and follow a lot of American news. So, the events of January 6th are not unknown to every citizen here. And like I said, number of people living in the region travel to the United States daily for employment. So it was a very real event for our region as it was for all of my American friends.
Yeah.
So certainly that was in the back of everyone's mind. And I think that contributed to, you saw real consistent messaging and real consistent support across, federally, provincially, and locally. All the governments are saying, this has to be managed. This can't continue. We have to allow commerce to be what commerce needs to be. This isn't the way for these people to get their message across and get their voice heard.
Right. And when you say aligned, Dan, can you give us a sense of what that meant? Was it you're looking at city services, police, media as well in that mix of coordination?
Well, we definitely saw the heavy support of law enforcement, and law enforcement getting a lot of supports in should they need, if this thing were to escalate, they had the supports that they needed to keep things contained. And
So
I thought
that was from the provincial government, or was that local law enforcement?
All the way across. So
Okay.
there were multiple levels of government that were providing intelligence, supports, equipment. There was multiple levels that were engaged in it. Mm-hmm. And I think they did a great job. I think there was somewhere in the neighborhood, 90, 100 plus people that were formally arrested. Out of that, I think it was about 40, 45 people that were charged with something. But overall, we didn't see destruction of property. We didn't see disrespect of property. I can't recall any incident of people being hurt in any way, shape, or form. And at the end of the day, there are people who stood tall with their message and were, the last group to leave. But for the most part, it was peacefully diffused.
Yeah.
We were lucky.
Well, being lucky is the residue of preparation, right? And obviously you did something like that. Yeah. Was there, when you talk about chatter on social media, obviously, we see the same thing. We saw the same thing here in the United States. There was a tip-off with active social media use that something was going to happen. Were you guys able to use social media at all to sort of counteract or to get information out there about to the citizens of Windsor, Essex about what was going on?
Yeah, we definitely saw our leadership using all communication tools available to them. So, they had media releases. Definitely Twitter was a social media tool. Mm-hmm. The city has a Facebook page. There was a great deal of communication on a high level of frequency to make sure people understood what was happening and what was the need for change and what was the potential to make sure that change occurred. I think they did a great job in getting appropriate communication out.
Yeah, and of course there's always some egging along by the media, right? Jimmy
Sure.
Breslin, the famous late newspaper writer here in New York, said the main purpose of television is to get you to watch more television. And so, I was looking before we went on here at some of the reporting, and the American side in particular was referring to confrontations, referring to crackdowns and things like that. So between the time when the trucks first parked themselves on that bridge and the mid-February sort of resolution, would you describe it as a crackdown, or was there something else happening that kind of eased the tension so that, again, there was no outbreak of violence?
I think your point is exactly accurate. Media is in the business of capturing attention and having you pay attention to their media news. So, the adjective crackdown versus, containment and management, what do you want to call this thing? But at the end of the day, there was a large show of enforcement. There was a lot of support for enforcement. And to the best of my knowledge, no one was beating anybody else up. There wasn't, there were people who had to be escorted. There were people that were escorted in handcuffs, but there wasn't the type of violence that's fresh in everybody's mind that we saw from January 6th. So I wouldn't use some of that stronger language to describe everything that was going on. But I think the truck drivers did the right thing. They needed their voices heard. I believe their message was a reasonable message, and the people rallied around them, and they were free to do so. But at the end of the day, when it had to be disbanded, it became disbanded, and we were fine.
Yeah, and you really avoided what could have been potentially a dangerous situation, of course.
Absolutely.
And I thought, maybe the mayor. I watched Mayor Dilkins. It's Dilkins, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Responding, and there was this measured tone. It was very calm, almost soothing, and he kept referring to what's important in a democracy and where the line is drawn. At any point, did you feel that the thing had crossed the line where you might need to do something that would take it to the next level? Because that would be the challenge.
Yeah, I think, it's like a game of chicken. I mean, it's really where you're at is you've got one side saying, we're not going to budge, we need things to change. And you got the other side saying, well, no, yeah, you're going to move. And here's what's going to come. This is what we're going to do. And this is what we're going to do. And we're going to give you some time to hear us out and move along, or you're not going to move along. Well, we're going to help you move along. Now, here's how we're going to help you move along. And so all of that stuff was communicated, so there wasn't any surprises. And I think it got done well.
Yeah. Obviously, if no one got hurt and no one was swinging clubs, the danger, of course, is secondarily economic here. Obviously, this is not some insignificant part of the world where our two economies don't depend on it.
Right.
And of course, you guys were also working on a multi-billion-dollar deal with the Korean company LG at the time, right?
Yeah, and so I'm not privy to any of that activity was going on with our economic development people, and at all different kinds of level of government. But I think we can safely assume there was a lot of discussions going on. These kinds of plans don't come together in just a matter of a few days. Some of these things take years to put together. So most certainly that was going on in the backdrop in somebody's mind.
Sure. And again, the other concern would always be, okay, it was resolved well, which shows good on you. But would businesses be skittish about investing in Windsor if they thought this might happen again? How do you handle what is potentially that perception in the short term?
Yeah, I would say if I was a significant business investor and you're looking at a place to bring investment and there seems to be hostility in that area, it would certainly be cause for concern. I think anybody would have those kinds of thoughts.
Yeah. Is there any messaging that you've had to do since with any of the, because you guys get a lot of investment into Windsor, any messaging that's had to go out to tell that story again? Are you telling about how it was successfully resolved, or is it just, let's move on? We've got two economies to run here.
Yeah, I think from what I've seen, it's let's move on. That was then, this is now. And in the last month and so, we've had a lot of great messaging to be able to communicate. A lot of new investments coming into the area. Like you said, a recent LG announcement in order to have a battery factory to be manufacturing batteries for electric vehicles. Stellantis is making an investment in the vehicle factories here. And for a long time, Windsor has been considered the automotive capital of Canada. I think a lot of people have been thinking that's been fading a little bit, but I'll tell you what, with the recent announcements, we've changed those perceptions and we're right back on track where we need to be. Yeah. And there's more messaging to come.
Dan, I don't want to let the opportunity go by to not be able then to talk about what's happening there with regard to smart manufacturing, the auto industry today. Are there any developments, again, that relate to some of the smart manufacturing, which everybody has an interest in right now, EVs that we should be knowing, that we should be looking at? Yeah,
and not to be, I want to say that this is all founded out of when we became an intelligent community member. So, the consortium membership that we have around our table, we've adopted the ICF method. Connecting Windsor Essex is focused on advocating for that method. And so there are a number of, I'll say, small initiating and pilot projects that really embrace that method, from connecting the three Ps: public sector, private sector, and post-secondary education. How are these people, the triple helix, how are they working together so that we can move ourselves into smart city initiatives, data-driven decisions, and then making sure that there's that social impact to this, the community impact, where everyone is benefiting. What's the saying is the rising tide lifts all ships. Mm-hmm. And so it's not subconscious here, it's conscious here.
Right. How are citizens reacting to both, the crisis that occurred on the bridge and, where you guys are headed going forward? Are you, what are your citizens telling you? What are you guys hearing?
So I think like you asked before, I think, the convoy and and we're sort of beyond that. I think citizens are pretty excited now about the most recent announcements and saying, okay, great, how do we participate? And we're finding ways to get more people to participate. There's lots of talk about new jobs coming. There's lots of jobs. There's lots of talk about new training coming, getting people ready for the new jobs. So we've got, I think we've got a lot of positive momentum happening in the area. And that's where the majority of the conversations are. I'm sure, like anything, there's going to be some people that, it hasn't passed the, what do we call it? The Snicker test with them, right. The litmus test with them. I mean,
sniff test.
Yeah. And that's okay. Bring your concern, bring your issue forward. But at the end of the day, something needs to happen. Here are the things that are happening. Let's participate and make them better.
Yeah. One of the virtues in a way, it's almost a cliche about, having gone through a bad experience successfully, it makes you more mature. It's like, being a goalie with 50 shots on goal against you, right? Next game, you know a few more things than you knew the game going in.
Right.
But primary lessons learned for going forward in the community. What do you think was the most searing lesson that you now have taken and said, now we're even a more resilient place, both socially and in our ability to respond and in our ability to continue to perform economically?
Yeah, I think that if I have to guess at this, I have to say the primary lesson learned is we're going to springboard from January 6th. Nobody liked that. Nobody would want to see anything like that, right? And yet here you've got this very high-tempered situation that could really elevate and find itself in that place. So I think, a lesson executed was high communication. So alignment of leadership right across from the highest levels all the way down to the local levels, and consistency. Like, economic development was supporting the message. Chamber of Commerce was supporting the message. Other agencies, the union here was supporting the message. Everybody, all the right agencies, organizations, political levels were on the same message. The message was delivered respectfully, and the message was managed respectfully. So I don't know if that's as a lesson learned. We could say sure from January 6th because nobody wanted that, but I think the right way to say it is lesson executed. Yeah. Communicate. It's consistent right across the board, and I think we've got a really positive result to show for it.
Well, you do, and nobody can ever say you can communicate too much.
Right.
I mean, which you guys have always made that a golden rule. So that's the secret to your ability to be a great collaborator, Dan. I don't know if you know that, but that's your secret.
Thank you.
Well, listen, I appreciate you making the time for us today, because I know this was a big event for you guys, but as I say, I know you're moving forward too. There's a new bridge now, right? The Gordy Howe Bridge, is that up?
Yeah, it's under construction. You can come by anytime you like, and I'll show you its phase. We can't get on it yet.
Yeah.
But I drive by it frequently, and I drive by with my kids frequently. And every time we drive by, there's another phase of it complete. And I point it out to them. I say, hey guys, look at that. That is history in the making.
It is.
There will be a day when this is complete and there is traffic on there. Your dad's going to be gone, but you're going to be driving on it, by it, through it.
Yeah.
And you are witnessing history in the making right there. Don't ever forget it.
Yeah, you don't build those every day.
No, that doesn't happen very often.
That's a generational thing. Well, congratulations. And I love being up there. So as soon as I can get up there, I certainly will. Dan, thanks again.
My pleasure. Always my pleasure, Lou.
We've taken a look at the truck convoy protest in Canada with the city of Windsor. City, we come back home, at least for us, and we go to the capital of the United States for a very special conversation. It's safe to say that Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton is an American icon. She has lived what will be seen as the quintessential life of a patriot when her contributions to American history and society are added up and studied. As the representative from the District of Columbia here, since 1991, she represents one of the more unique communities in the USA and perhaps the world. Many of you probably know her through the portrayal of actress Joy Brandt in the Amazon film Good Girls Revolt. The film chronicled her work as the young lawyer who represented a group of women who sued Newsweek magazine here in New York for discrimination back in 1970. But there's been much more since then, and we want to talk with her a little bit about that. Congresswoman Norton, welcome to the intelligent community.
My pleasure.
It's an honor to have you. As I mentioned, we're continuing our look at how communities respond when insurrection or profound challenges arrive. And I wanted to speak with you a little bit about January 6th, of course, 2021. Can you sort of take us through the response to that event? And in your view, obviously a high level view, where have we arrived at today in terms of the life of the city of Washington, D.C.?
Well, this was a mob assault not only on the Capitol, it reflected itself in our neighborhoods as well. We have people living right up to almost to the steps of the Capitol. There's a residential community surrounding the Capitol itself. The National Guard was out in front. People went out to give them coffee and to comfort them. The whole city was on alert. I live 9 blocks from the Capitol.
Yeah.
So I must say I felt it.
No, absolutely.
As it was occurring.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that you've been quite articulate about, I remember an interview maybe 3 or 4 months after the event, was the need to make sure that there's an openness in the city. I think you were referring to the fencing back then. Obviously, for the United States of America, just symbolically, it's important to have an open city. But in terms of just running the city itself, that's important. Where are you on that now? Are you of a mind that we need more fencing? We need technology to protect our Capitol and our elected officials?
We have the technology. The fencing was a complete outrage. And I worked until we got that fencing removed. And look what we have now. We have fencing around the Supreme Court. It looks like people who are supposed to control these important buildings are using 19th century approaches.
The technology question sort of begs another question, as someone who has spent a career liberating people to pursue their rights. Are we becoming more gated, both physically and in terms of technology? I mean, we're at the point now where public officials are being doxxed. I mean, the mayor of Chicago, people were going to her house. Supreme Court Justice Alito, people are going to his house because they can find out where these people live. Does that concern you, given, again, the work you've done to open up society?
Well, it is concerning. In fact, I think that there's a statute that here in a U.S. statute about intimidating the justices of the Supreme Court by picketing their houses. To me, that seems a bit off limits, picket the court. But picketing the private residences does seem to me to go beyond the pale.
Yeah, it does. I think it's to anyone, who's reasonable or rational or intelligent, it is. But there's
It's not going to get you anything. I mean, it's not as if, you pick it in order to get a result.
Right.
Pick at the court. Don't pick at someone's house.
Right. I guess my question though is, when we talk about social media and all the tools that have been so productive for us, on one hand, these things also give us the opportunity to do those kinds of things. And is there something that we can do to build trust in our culture and our society where people know that it's just the wrong thing to do?
Well, the polarization makes it very difficult to rebuild the kind of trust we had. You've seen it meld away. I think it began with the Trump administration or with Trump himself. And we've seen that it's difficult to rebuild.
Yeah, it is.
I think the January 6th committee is important because it's going to lay out what really happened. And I think it will spur thought and hopefully thoughtful responses.
Yeah. Well, as they say, from your mouth to God's ears, right? The other question I have, obviously, you've been speaking a lot about statehood for the district. I saw you on Stephen Colbert's show holding up that flag with 51 stars. Looked pretty good, by the way. I have two questions. First of all, who made that flag? Because it was pretty cool. But we have an international audience that listens to us as well. Can you just briefly explain why it's important in your view for the capital to be, the Washington, D.C. to be its own state?
The district would become the 51st state. It would have all of the rights of the other states. Without statehood, it can't have those rights. For example, Republicans, as it turns out, can interfere with the business of the District of Columbia. They can't interfere with the business of Virginia and Maryland, which are surrounding states. So we want the kind of independence that the 50 states enjoy,
right,
without interference from anybody.
And you would have two senators as well, which would be
two senators is perhaps the best of it.
Yeah, that's right.
We have no representation in the Senate. I am able to get things done in the Senate by finding allies there, but that's difficult to do.
Yeah, and you've just introduced your 100th bill of this session. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, some people don't even introduce one. I wanted to ask you, Congresswoman, if Washington, D.C. becomes a separate state, does it change the configuration with regard to how it functions? Because when I think of it, I think of Singapore. It's this would be a city state effectively, and that's a pretty successful model. Have you given thought to sort of the economic reformulation, or would there be one?
Not much of one. There are 8 wards, as we call them, in the District of Columbia. That would be the state. That thin strip of land that is on the mall would be the capital.
That would be it.
That would be what the capital would be, yes.
Yeah. And would it be able to have a different economic proposition? Would it be able to do different things?
The district has the wherewithal to do whatever states can do. It has the funding. It has the residents. There are 2 states that are much larger than the district.
Yeah, that's right. And you also have the proximity to pretty significant economic powerhouses. Arlington County, for example, they were one of our intelligent communities one year. I mean, there's a lot of economic activity, startup activity. I think people always consider it just a government center, but there's an awful lot of private industry and activity there as well, isn't there?
In Maryland and Virginia, yes, and the district is part of that.
Yeah. I want to ask you something about leadership before I let you go, because that's what we're talking about. You've been in Congress since 1991, or in that seat. I would argue, we would say that leadership has become more challenging now. Would you agree, or has it always been really challenging?
No, I think it's more challenging because of the polarization.
Yeah.
In the country.
Right.
Part of the problem is the diversity of the country. This is 50 states.
Yeah.
And it is very difficult to bring them together unless you have unless leadership begins to take hold.
Mm-hmm. So it's a leadership issue.
I think it is.
Yeah.
To bring people together, yes.
Yeah, and all the way down, right? All the way down to the city councils and so forth.
Certainly all the way down.
School boards. I mean, that's because we work at the local level, and we actually see some really, really good city councils and mayors sort of coming online where the thinking is different. So I think you would be encouraged to take a look around, the 200 cities that we're involved with. Just again, final question. As I said, we're about communities. Obviously, you work on the infrastructure committee. And again, you think about communities. What is the biggest challenge going to be over the next 10 years for the places that people call home?
With different ways to communicate, is a big challenge to big cities. People won't have to move to places like New York and Washington because with broadband, with thousands of ways to communicate, people in cities like the District of Columbia are concerned. For example, our metro system, with people sitting at home to do their work. They don't need to come to work as often. This kind of decentralization that comes from the different ways we communicate could pose an issue for big cities. Our downtown, for example, does not have as many people. Mm-hmm. It's reflected in our restaurants and places that people congregate. So there's going to be a refashioning, restructuring of the American city.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting. I think Mayor Adams here in New York said something to the effect that we've got more empty commercial space now. We've got so much empty commercial space. I believe he said we could fit. It could all fit in downtown Phoenix. And that's how much we've got. I mean, that does need some retrofitting, right? Because that's what you're talking about.
It has huge economic ramifications.
It sure does. Is there any sense? With Washington, for example, how we might be able to, rebalance the economy as that happens? Because I would agree with you. I think it's inevitable. That's another one of those technological shifts, right?
Oh, believe me, a city like the District is thinking that through right now. I mean, it's literally an issue on the drawing boards. Nobody knows what to do.
Yeah, that's right. Well, there are a lot of people thinking about it, fortunately. And
a lot of people thinking about it.
Yeah.
Out of necessity.
Exactly. Yeah. Nothing so concentrates the mind as the prospect of a noose, someone said. I really appreciate you making the time for us. It's an honor to have you here.
It's been my great pleasure.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye now. And that's Congressman Eleanor Holmes Norton for the Intelligent Community. I'm Lou Zaccarella, along with my producer, Matt Owen. When you go out, remember, there really is no place like home. Take care, everybody.